All right, it looks like it is 9:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. I just want to say good morning and thanks for everybody for joining. I'd like to welcome everybody to Watershed Wednesday. I'm Emily D. Carr. I'm the Ag Coordinator for the Upper Susquehanna Coalition. And just as a quick introduction, Watershed Wednesdays are hosted by the Upper Susquehanna Coalition and the Otsego County Conservation Association. So we also have Amy Wyatt on the phone. She's the one hosting the Zoom meeting today. These weekly sessions are taking the place of the Upper Susquehanna Watershed Forum for 2020 since we're unable to meet in person due to COVID. We currently have 4 more sessions scheduled for 2020. That schedule will be posted at the end of today's session and can also be found at the link that I've posted in the chat. To get things started, I'd like to introduce our presenters. We have Cassandra Davis from New York State DEC and Alex Kwa from SUNY ESF. They've been working on some analyses to compare the relationships between BMP implementation that's occurring in the watershed and the actual water quality measurements collected through a few different sources. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alex and Cassie.
Morning, everyone.
Thanks, Emily.
So we're gonna go through what Emily just said and try and talk about some of the relationships between BMP implementation in the Upper Susquehanna watershed and the water quality measurements that have been collected throughout the region. So today we're going to go through some of the backgrounds and trends, and then we're going to go into some of the time series for the BMP implementations, and we'll show you quite a lot of maps today to show you some of the spatial distributions of them. And then we'll have some more focused case study examples, and then we'll go into the conclusions.
All right, so this is a little bit of background about the sources of data that we looked at. The USGS non-tidal network is used by the Chesapeake Bay program to assess our progress for our total maximum daily load, or TMDL, targets for New York. The Rotating Integrated Basin Studies is a DEC program that looks at the Biological Assessment Profile, or BAP score. And we're going to look at the spatial data from Chesapeake Bay Land Use Dataset and the National Hydrography Dataset. And below on the map, it shows the HUC 8 watersheds in the different colors. And then nested within those are the HUC 10s, and they are all named. So the non-tidal network USGS gauging station, they're used to assess progress. The daily data was summarized to monthly and yearly. For this, we use the monthly data, and each gauging station is either long-term or short-term. The long-term gauging station we have is Towanda, and that started in the 1980s. And then the short-term started around 2005. And there are 4 of those within the watershed.
Yeah, 5 of those.
Oh, 5 of those, yep.
Yep. So just zoom in on the map earlier. So 3 of these are distributed on the eastern side of the subwater basin, and then 2 of them are on the west side of it. And Towanda is located down here in Pennsylvania, and it also includes part of the watershed that are in Pennsylvania state. So again, just to reiterate, Campbell on the west side, and then it's nested within Chemung, and Rockdale contains the smallest subwatershed on the east side, nested within Conklin, and which are both nested within Waverly. And Towanda is the one that encompasses all of them. So for most of our more general analyses, we've been using Towanda to try and get a gauge of what has been going on in the state of New York. So just to kind of show again the kind of data that I think you can find in the New York State reports and from the Chesapeake Bay program. These are data directly obtained from the NTN's gauging stations. So these are monthly data points. So each dot here represents a month in a year, and the lines show the lowest smoothing line. So we can see here that there's an overall decreasing trend in New York, shown by the Towanda blue line here. And you also notice that in Waverly and in Chemung, there's this uptick after 2010 or 2012. And this uptick is also shown a little bit in Towanda. There's a very more recent rise in total nitrogen. So again, this is flow normalized total nitrogen concentration, and the flow normalization is calculated by the USGS, and maybe it accounts for some of the differences in flow throughout the year. Same thing here in total phosphorus. Again, flow normalized concentrations. It's an overall decreasing trend, and although the rate of decrease is much slower overall, but when we look at the sub-watersheds, it seems like these rates are actually coming down pretty quickly. So we don't quite know why in Towanda it doesn't show the same type of decrease overall. For suspended sediments, the picture is a little bit more vague, to say the least. So you have pretty fluctuating levels throughout the years, especially among the sub-watersheds. So not all of them are doing the same things. Some of them, like Campbell, seems to be decreasing, but for Waverly, Conklin, and Towanda, and Chemung, they seem to be increasing at varying rates. And so one thing to note here is that we think that precipitation has a pretty big influence on the changes in these measurements, especially for 2019, when we have these more recent upticks. It seems like the high precipitation year in 2019 has something to do with it.
So we also looked at data from the rotating integrated basin studies. This is a 5-year sampling cycle that's run by the DEC Stream Monitoring Program. It looks at macroinvertebrates, also water column sediment, organism tissue, chemistry. And with the macroinvertebrates, it creates a BAP score. The higher the score, the better the indicated water quality is. So you can see all the dots on the map. The larger dots represent multiple sampling years. So you can see on the main stem of the Chemung River on the left and the Susquehanna on the right, we have a lot of sampling over the 20-year period. And this data is available on DEC's website and on an ArcGIS viewer.
Yep. So today we're just gonna be focused on the BAP score part of the RIPS dataset. And again, like what Cassie said, this dataset, this score is derived mostly based on stream macroinvertebrates, but it also includes a bunch of different measurements, ranging from species richness to EPT richness to Hilsenhoff index, and all kinds of other relevant biotic indices. The full description of what kind of data goes into it can be found following this link. But the key point here is to try and explain the different impact levels that they have established based on this BAP score. So everything above 5 is moderately impacted, and the higher score you get, the better it is. And this goes from 0 to 10. So there are, I think throughout this whole time series, there might have just been one point that has been below 2.5. And the picture on the right here just shows you the changes in the sampling distribution throughout the whole period. So this is at a 5-year cycle, so it kind of mirrors the actual schedule of the RIPS surveys. So you can see in the early 80s, 70s, there really hasn't been that much sampling. And as we come up to more recent times, the sampling actually started to increase throughout the whole subwatershed. Yeah. So overall, we don't really see any general changes throughout this whole watershed area. And for the purposes of what we're going to show later on, we won't be using some of the stuff from the 70s or up to the 90s, just because the sampling distribution during those periods are quite different compared to the more recent ones. And we don't think that the data is as comparable. But as you can see, most of the scores that they've collected are well within the slightly impacted zone, and some of them are in the non-impacted zone, and there's only a few that stray down to the moderately impacted zone. So one of the things that I think we need to emphasize is that the data collected for the BAB score has a pretty unequal sampling distribution in the watershed. And you can kind of see, so here the y-axis is showing you the different HUC 10s, and the colors actually indicate the year when these data were collected. So the darker colors are older data and the lighter colors are newer data. So there's only a couple of data points that are really dark, and these are in the lower Shenango River and lower Chemung River. And you don't really see any clear trends of dark to light within any individual HUC 10. Some of them show some trend, but most of them don't. And the number of sampling points are also quite different. So some sites like Gannegatslet Creek, only 2 times it's been sampled, or Butternut Creek only been sampled once. But some of these other ones have been sampled much more regularly.
So we also looked at the spatial data using ArcGIS, and we looked at the 1 meter land use data set, which is available for the Chesapeake Bay program. It was developed by UVM in 2016, and it's based on satellite imagery in 2013. The National Hydrography data set, or NHD, looked at the stream kilometers and created a stream density map. And then we created from these two riparian management zone map, which is a 30-meter buffer around the NHD streams.
Yeah, so the riparian management zone is something that we wanted to use to try and delineate an area that is most likely to be where the buffers are placed, the buffer BMPs are placed. So again, just yeah. Go ahead, Cassie.
Oh, just to familiarize with the different HUC 8s and the HUC 10 names and where they are. But we can go through each land use has its own map. So this is the raw area of the 1 meter data set from Chesapeake Bay program, and it shows the agriculture for cropland, hay, and pasture. And then we also created a percent map that shows the density of the land use. So you can see the areas where they have the most cropland. And then the next land use is forested, which was the most common land use in the watershed. It had the highest percentages. And you can see it's almost up to 80% in one of the watersheds. And it's lower up in the headwater areas. So wetlands is higher in the headwaters in the northern part of the watershed. You can see them all light up. It's hard to see on this map because they are such a fine scale 1 meter data. But the percent makes it easier for those to pop out. And you can see how much lower the percent is for the wetlands compared to the ag and forested. Mm-hmm. This is the This is the impervious area within the watershed. Again, it's such a fine scale, it might be hard to see, but you can kind of make out where the cities are. There's Binghamton, Elmira to the left. And this is all the impervious area. So roads, buildings, and then it also includes tree canopy over impervious. And this is the percent. It's as expected. We have more impervious area in the cities for each HUC-10. So mixed open is kind of a catch-all for things that don't fit under any of the other categories. And we see a lot of shrub grass in there. And you can see it's a very small percent of the watershed, and it hardly comes up on the map. Turf grass is kind of where you can see the sprawl from the cities. Higher around the cities, and other towns light up now on the map. And then this is the water. So this kind of gets an idea of where like the reservoirs and lakes are, and then the wider sections of the stream. And again, you can see how fine that scale is. So the National Hydrography Dataset we use to determine the stream density and the riparian management zones. This is just an image. You can see comparing that to the image before. Now you can see where every stream is in the watershed. So this is just the stream kilometers over the HUC-10 area, hectares. So this gives us a density of what HUC-10s have the greatest amount of streams, is the darker color. And for our analysis, we looked at the NHD land cover data set and then created that 30-meter buffer around the streams. And so you can see the stream NHD layer is that thin line that goes through the buffer watershed. And it doesn't follow exactly. And if you go to the slide before, you can see where on the left-hand side, it didn't pick up a stream, but we use the NHD layer because it's known that there is a stream here, even though the land cover data set didn't pick it up. So going to next, this is the aerial imagery showing where the streams are in the buffer, and this is the combined image. That next slide shows where the UVM determined there was cropland is in that orange, and you can see the turf grass in the lime green. So you can see it matches up pretty well with what's reality. And then that buffer is the grayed out area that we looked at. And this is similar to the stream density. It shows the riparian management zone over the HUC-10 acres. So it gives us a proportion of the RMZ for each HUC-10.
So first, we're going to show a little bit of the changes in BMP implementation throughout the whole region. So the first part we're going to show is the cumulative BMPs. So these are BMPs that have been, that when implemented, stay in the system. So things like exclusion fence forest buffers, things like wetlands, exclusion fence grass buffers, cropland, forest and grass buffers. So since the 2000s, I think it's been implemented at increasing every year. Some years do increase much more than others, obviously. But after 2005, you see really a sharper increase in all these BMPs. Just to note, the 2020 data, I think Cassie informed me that these ones might still increase more after completing the reporting for the 2020 BMPs. So just to show the amount of BMPs that have been implemented throughout the whole subwatershed. And then as opposed to the annual ones where the ones that you see outright here are the nutrient management plans. And then down here, you actually have the cover crops and also the soil conservation plans. So just to see what they look like. And again, it's kind of the same picture where after 2000, you really see a more stable increase. And these box plots actually show just kind of the average and the range of the amount of land that has implementation of these BMPs. Some years there's a lot more, and I think in the more recent 5 years, for most of these annual BMPs, there's been a higher level of implementation. And so each of these points are statistical outliers. So, but they also represent a very real implementation, right? So you have, in one of these hot 10s, you have 7,000 hectares um, of implemented nutrient management plans for nitrogen. Just to look at cover crops at a much lower level. So now we can see it a little bit clearer. Past 2005 is when we really see any implementation, and it's been pretty steady after that. So we're going to be just focusing on two of these BMPs today, nutrient management core nitrogen and buffer BMP. So one is an annual, one is a cumulative. And so for buffer BMPs, we're summing up all of the exclusion fence forest and grass buffers and cropland forest and grass buffers together as a buffer BMP as a whole.
So this map shows the nutrient management core hectares over the agricultural hectares that are available in the watershed. And you can see over time the increase in BMP management. And so this is an annual BMP, so it's only lasts 1 year, which is why you see some Huck 10s light up for 1 year, and then the next year they don't have any implementation.
And you can really see the focus of some of the BMPs and where they've been implemented. And so this is now an annual cumulative, annual sum. So instead of having them in box plots, you actually see how much BMP has been implemented in the whole watershed, right? And you really do see this sharp increase in the past 5 years compared to the previous decade. And like similar to what the map was showing you, some of the BMP implementation has been much more consistently reported in some of these hot 10s. When we notice that it's kind of the same thing with the buffer BMPs as well, as you'll see in a little bit. Again, just
so
to
this
show
is
the
showing,
same.
yeah, this shows the buffer BMP over the agriculture RMZ. So that was that layer that was created by using the 30-meter buffer on either side of the river or stream. And so you can see the implementation is now cumulative. So every year these Huck 10s, when they implement more buffers, it gets added on to the previous buffer.
Mm-hmm. And what we noticed that was kind of interesting was that, so this started much later compared to the nutrient management plans. And it also came in two waves, and in about 2007 and also around 2015. And there are fewer Huck 10s that have implemented these BMPs. And again, there's been more consistent reporting in some of these Huck 10s compared to others. So how do they relate to each other, BMP implementation and BAB scores? So BAB score being a biotic index, so to speak, we don't act when we put them together, we didn't actually see any clear trends. So you would expect to see a positive correlation where when you implement more BMPs, you would expect there to be higher BAB scores. But as we can see here, when we separate the data out, even by Huck 8, we don't really see any clear trends across the whole watershed. But maybe in some of these particular Huck 8s, we might see that they have some trend. Although in others, we're seeing trends that that is opposite to what we expect. And this is the same thing too for buffer BMPs. But again, this is even more difficult to kind of show just because of the number of BMPs that have been implemented for buffers has been much lower compared to compared to nutrient management plans. So now so we're going to show two case studies, right? So one is Conklin River, which is on the east side of this sub-watershed, and the Tioga River, which is on the west side. So the graph on the left is showing the changes in BMP separated out by the lower, middle, and upper river. And then the graph on the right is showing you the BMP implemented in those specific regions. And one of the main issues that we've had when we're trying to analyze this is at the HUC10 level, you don't get the same consistency in the number of sampling points that we get for both the BAP score and also the number of BMPs implemented at that level. So because of the way the BMPs have been implemented, only some of these HUC10s have a decent amount of BMP implementations for us to even run any comparisons. But this is just to show that in some of these HUC10s, in some of these areas, there are changes. There seems to be some change in the BAP scores, but there's no real clear corresponding changes of what we've been doing implementing the BMPs in those areas. So we're not really sure what the relationship actually is between the BMPs implemented and the buffers and the BAP score, or even the nutrient scores in these areas. So in Tioga River, this is one of the few ones that we actually see a clearer increase in BAP score. But again, we don't see a direct, very clear correlation here between the BMP implemented and the BAP scores. Same thing goes for the nutrient management plans. We don't see that same kind of relationship there.
So the key takeaways and management implications that we came across were for the nutrient trends, the overall decrease that we saw in TN and TP at each gauge station. We didn't see a decrease in suspended sediment throughout the years. And then there was that uptick towards the end for total nitrogen in Waverly and Chemung, and that the total phosphorus decreased sharper in some of the sub-gauging stations than they did at Towanda, the main gauge station that drains the whole Susquehanna watershed. For BMP implementation, the benefits of a dedicated BMP coordinator, we saw the increase in cover crops and the increase in buffers in certain watersheds, the benefit of state-supported BMP implementation, and the fact we might not be seeing changes could be for the BMP establishment time. Riparian buffers, when we implement them, they are young riparian buffers. It takes time. Like a 5-year-old riparian buffer isn't as good as a 10-year-old, which isn't as good as a 15-year-old riparian buffer. So it might just be, we'll see these increases over time. For the BAP score, we didn't see any clear trends. And the BAP score may not be an effective method for assessing regional BMP implementation, nutrient sediment reductions. We might just be too small and too infrequent monitoring for us to see an impact. And additional influences are the relative stability in the region. So you could see the BAP scores were high for almost the entire region. And so it's kind of like we're going from an A to an A+. So we might not see that increase right away, or it might be hard to get that little bit of additional increase rather than we had a degrading area that we had to improve. And the effect of climate warming on the streams, we've had more frequent and increased precipitation in the more recent years, and that could be why we're seeing that uptick in sediment and TN. And then the recent land use changes could play an impact. The data set that we used is primarily from 2016, and it's 2020 now, so it's 4 years old. But that was our takeaways. Any questions? I see there's one in the chat.
Yes. Yep. Go ahead.
Oh, so this is, our spikes attributed to more funding or people or both, or is it just more consistent data collection? It's all of the above. I think when we have more funding for certain BMPs, we see those spikes in BMP implementation, and then consistent data collection. It could be that we saw some HUCs report a couple years in a row and then drop off, then start reporting again. So it could be a data collection issue or a funding issue.
All right. Very good. I'm going to take over the screen share to show. Oops. Can you guys see the? There we go. So these are there any other questions? I just want to make sure I wasn't showing off my email. But are there any other questions for our presenters? All right. Well, thank you so much, Alex and Cassandra. We appreciate you coming and being part of our Watershed Wednesday. A lot of great information. The recording for this will be available very soon on both the USC and the OCCA websites. And as you can see, like I said, just wanted to make sure I wasn't sharing my email with you all. We've got a few more sessions coming up. So next week is customer testimonials. So getting some testimonies of what's going on with the customers to see what they're thinking about. And we hope that you can join us. Yeah, Emily, anything else you wanted to add?
I think that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.